In the quaint village of St. Mary Mead, a priceless Ming vase vanishes during a bustling estate sale, plunging Willow Grange into a web of suspicion. Was it the desperate widow, Mrs. Hargreaves, clinging to her last hope? The ambitious collector, Mr. Trent, thwarted by a rival bid? The meticulous appraiser, Mr. Wren, with secrets hidden behind his spectacles? Or the charming Miss Beaumont, whose sudden arrival raises eyebrows? Enter Miss Jane Marple, whose gentle demeanour masks a razor-sharp mind. As clues unravel, a rose petal, a smudge of polish, a whispered rumour, she weaves a trap that exposes greed's fatal flaw. In just 30 seconds, one truth emerges. No secret escapes Miss Marple's gaze. Chapter 1. The Estate Sale at Willow Grange. The August sun filtered through the ancient elms of Willow Grange, casting dappled shadows across the manicured lawns of the old manor in St. Mary Mead. The air was thick with the scent of roses and the hum of anticipation, for today marked the estate sale of the late Colonel Hargreaves's possessions, a necessity driven by the debts that had shadowed his widow's days since his passing. In the grand drawing room, where oak panels gleamed with the patina of centuries, Miss Jane Marple sat quietly in a chintz-covered armchair, her delicate hands folded over a cup of tea, her eyes sharp as needles beneath her unassuming straw hat. To the casual observer, she was merely a village spinster, invited out of courtesy by the flustered hostess. But to those who knew her, Miss Marple's presence was a quiet promise of insight into the intricacies of human behaviour. The room buzzed with activity. Mrs. Evelyn Hargreaves, a woman of faded elegance in her late 50s, moved among the guests with a strained smile, her black silk dress whispering as she adjusted a display of silver candlesticks. Her hands, though gloved, betrayed a slight tremble, a sign, Miss Marple noted, of the burden she carried. The sale was her last hope to salvage the family's finances, and at its heart was a single treasure, a Ming dynasty vase, its porcelain surface a delicate dance of cobalt dragons and clouds, glowing softly on a velvet-draped pedestal. Its value, whispered among the gathered crowd, was enough to clear the Hargreaves' debts and more. Among the prospective buyers was Mr. Lionel Trent, a collector whose name was synonymous with rare artifacts. He was a tall man with a hawkish nose and a manner that suggested both wealth and impatience. His eyes, dark and calculating, lingered on the vase, and Miss Marple observed how he ran a finger along its rim, as if claiming it already. He exchanged clipped words with a rival bidder, his tone betraying a hunger that went beyond mere appreciation. Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. She had seen such ambition before, in men who valued possession over principle. Nearby stood Mr. Percival Wren, the appraiser, a wiry figure whose fastidious nature was evident in his neatly pressed suit, and the way he adjusted his gold-rimmed spectacles with precise fingers. He hovered near the vase, his clipboard clutched like a shield, murmuring to Mrs. Hargreaves about its impeccable provenance. "A rare piece," he said, his voice low but carrying a note of reverence. "Late Ming, circa 1600, with no discernible flaws." Miss Marple, stirring her tea, noted the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow despite the coolness of the room. A man so meticulous, she thought, might notice more than he let on, or hide more than he showed. The crowd parted slightly as a newcomer entered, a young woman with an air of calculated charm. Miss Clara Beaumont, introducing herself as a distant cousin of the late Colonel, had arrived uninvited, her letter of introduction clutched in a gloved hand. Her auburn hair was swept beneath a fashionable hat, and her smile was bright. But Miss Marple's keen gaze caught the flicker of unease in Mrs. Hargreaves's eyes as she greeted her. Miss Beaumont's presence seemed to ripple through the room, drawing curious glances. She drifted toward the vase, her fingers brushing the air near it, as if drawn by its beauty. "How exquisite!" she murmured, though her eyes darted to Mrs. Hargreaves, gauging her reaction. Miss Marple's knitting needles, tucked in her bag, seemed to itch for use. There was something deliberate, she thought, in the young woman's casual intrusion. As the sale began, bids were called, and the room grew taut with anticipation. Mr. Trent's voice cut through the murmurs, his offers climbing steadily until a rival outbid him, prompting a scowl that he quickly masked. Mrs. Hargreaves, stationed near the vase, announced a brief pause for tea in the garden, her voice tight with the strain of hospitality. The guests filed out, leaving the drawing room momentarily empty, save for a footman stationed at the door. Miss Marple lingered, her eyes sweeping the room, noting the heavy curtains, the polished floor, and the pedestal where the vase stood, serene and unguarded. When the guests returned, a cry from Mrs. Hargreaves shattered the genteel atmosphere. The vase was gone. The pedestal stood bare, its velvet cloth undisturbed, as if the treasure had simply dissolved into the air. Miss Marple, setting her teacup down with care, felt a familiar prickle of curiosity. The game, she knew, had begun. Chapter 2. The Vanishing Act. The late afternoon light had softened into a gentle glow, filtering through the tall windows of Willow Grange's drawing room, where only moments ago the air had been alive with the hum of bids and polite chatter. Now, a stunned silence hung over the assembled guests, broken only by Mrs. Evelyn Hargreaves's sharp cry of dismay. The Ming Dynasty vase, the centerpiece of the estate sale, had vanished from its velvet-draped pedestal. Miss Jane Marple, seated unobtrusively near a corner table, set her teacup down with deliberate care, her pale blue eyes scanning the room. Her frail appearance belied the keen mind that was already sifting through the chaos, noting the flushed cheeks, the darting glances, and the subtle shifts in posture among the gathered crowd. To her, this was no mere theft but a puzzle, its pieces scattered in the gestures and words of those present. Mrs. Hargreaves stood beside the empty pedestal, her gloved hands clasped tightly, her face pale beneath the powder that had been hastily applied that morning. "It was here," she said, her voice trembling with a mixture of shock and indignation. "I saw it myself, not half an hour ago, before we went out for tea." Her eyes swept the room, seeking confirmation, but met only murmurs of surprise and sympathy from the other guests. The footman, a young man named Thomas with a freckled face and nervous demeanour, hovered near the door, his hands twisting together as he stammered that he had not left his post during the tea break. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on him briefly. His unease, she thought, might be nothing more than the natural anxiety of youth under scrutiny, but it was a detail to store away. The room, with its heavy oak panelling and faded tapestries, seemed to close in as the reality of the theft settled over the gathering. The pedestal, a sturdy mahogany piece, bore no signs of disturbance, no scratches, no displaced cloth, no hint of how the vase had been spirited away. The velvet cover, a deep burgundy, lay smooth and pristine, as if mocking the absence of its precious charge. Miss Marple's fingers twitched, longing for her knitting needles, which always helped her think, but she contented herself with folding her hands in her lap, her mind already tracing the outlines of the scene. Word of the theft spread quickly, and within the hour, Inspector Craddock arrived from the county police station, his broad shoulders filling the doorway as he entered with a notebook in hand. He was a man in his early 40s, with a square jaw and a manner that suggested competence tempered by a certain rigidity of thought. Miss Marple had encountered him before, on matters small and great in St. Mary Mead, and while she respected his diligence, she knew his methods sometimes missed the subtle occurrence of human nature. He surveyed the room, his eyes narrowing as he took in the empty pedestal, then turned to Mrs. Hargreaves, who was now seated, fanning herself with a lace handkerchief. "Mrs. Hargreaves," he began, his tone measured but firm, "can you confirm the last time you saw the vase?" "It was just before the tea break," she replied, her voice steadying slightly under his authority. "I announced a pause at 3:30, and we all went to the garden. The vase was on the pedestal then, I'm certain of it. I checked it myself, as I did several times during the sale. It's worth a fortune, Inspector, and I was taking no chances." Craddock nodded, jotting a note. "And the room was locked during the break?" "Yes," Mrs. Hargreaves said, though a flicker of uncertainty crossed her face. "That is, I locked the door myself as we left, and Thomas was stationed outside. No one could have entered without being seen." The footman, Thomas, blushed under the inspector's gaze. "I didn't move, sir," he said quickly. "I stood right here the whole time. No one came in or out." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to the young man's boots, noting a faint smudge of garden soil on one heel. A small thing, perhaps, but she filed it away, her mind recalling a similar case years ago when a servant's muddy shoes had revealed more than he intended. She made no comment, however, and instead turned her attention to the other key figures now gathering under Craddock's scrutiny: Mr. Lionel Trent, Mr. Percival Wren, and Miss Clara Beaumont. Mr. Trent, the wealthy collector, stood near the fireplace, his arms crossed and his expression one of barely concealed irritation. His dark suit was immaculate, but his fingers drummed restlessly against his sleeve, a habit Miss Marple noted as a sign of agitation. "This is absurd," he said, his voice sharp. "I was outbid fair and square. Why should I steal what I could have bought? I was in the garden with the others, drinking tea and discussing the weather. Of all things, ask anyone." Craddock raised an eyebrow. "And you didn't return to the drawing room at any point during the break?" "Not once," Trent replied firmly, though his eyes slid briefly toward the pedestal, as if he could still see the vase in his mind's eye. Miss Marple, watching closely, wondered if his indignation stemmed from innocence or from the frustration of a plan gone awry. She had known men like Trent before, collectors whose desire for rare objects could burn like a fever, blinding them to propriety. Mr. Percival Wren, the appraiser, stood a little apart. His clipboard still clutched against his chest like a talisman. His spectacles glinted in the waning light as he adjusted them, a gesture Miss Marple was beginning to recognize as a nervous tic. "I was with Mr. Hargreaves's solicitor in the garden," he said, his voice precise but tinged with unease. "We were discussing the provenance of a set of porcelain figurines. I had no reason to return here, and I assure you, Inspector, the vase was in place when I last saw it." Miss Marple's gaze settled on his hands, which were unusually steady for a man whose voice betrayed nerves. There was a faint scent of polish about him, she noted, as if he had been handling waxed furniture, or perhaps something else. She thought of the pedestal, its surface gleaming, and wondered if Mr. Shin's meticulous nature extended to covering his tracks. Miss Clara Beaumont, the uninvited guest, was the last to be questioned. She sat on a brocade sofa, her auburn hair catching the light, her hands folded demurely in her lap. Her dress, a shade of green that complemented her eyes, was stylish but not ostentatious, though Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the glint of an expensive sapphire brooch pinned to her collar, a detail at odds with her claim of modest means. "I was in the garden, admiring the roses," she said, her voice light and almost musical. "I'm afraid I got a bit lost in them. I didn't even notice the time passing until Mrs. Hargreaves called us back." Craddock's pen paused. "You didn't return to the house at all?" "Not at all," she replied, her smile unwavering. "I'm a stranger here, Inspector. I only came to see the old place, being a cousin of the Colonel's. I had no interest in the vase, except to admire it." Her eyes met Miss Marple's for a fleeting moment, and the older woman detected a flicker of calculation beneath the innocence. Miss Beaumont, she thought, was not quite what she seemed, and her presence at the sale raised questions that bore further exploration. The inspector turned to the other guests, a small crowd of local gentry and curious villagers who had attended the sale. None reported seeing anything unusual, though their accounts varied in small details. Where they had stood in the garden, whom they had spoken to, what they had heard. Miss Marple listened intently, her mind sorting these fragments like pieces of a quilt. One woman, Mrs. Bantry, a friend of Miss Marple's, mentioned that she had seen Mr. Trent step away from the tea tables briefly, though she could not say where he had gone. Another guest, a retired major, recalled Mr. Wren lingering near the house, adjusting a window latch, though he thought little of it at the time. Miss Beaumont, it seemed, had been universally noticed for her charm, but not for any specific actions. Craddock, satisfied for the moment, dismissed the guests but asked Mrs. Hargreaves, Mr. Trent, Mr. Wren and Miss Beaumont to remain available for further questioning. He instructed his constable to search the drawing-room and adjacent areas, though Miss Marple suspected the vase was no longer in the house. The theft, she felt, had been too precise, too opportunistic to leave such an obvious trace. As the crowd dispersed, she rose, her movements slow and deliberate, and approached the pedestal for a closer look. The velvet cloth, she noted, was perfectly aligned, its folds undisturbed. The pedestal itself was solid, with no hidden compartments or loose panels that she could discern with a gentle tap of her knuckles. The floor beneath was polished to a mirror shine, free of scuffs or marks. Yet something caught her eye, a single petal, pale pink and slightly crushed, lying just beneath the edge of the velvet. It was a rose petal, she realized, and her mind flashed to Miss Beaumont's claim of admiring the roses in the garden. Had she brought it in on her shoe, perhaps, or had it fallen from someone else's clothing? Miss Marple slipped the petal into her handkerchief, her expression unchanged, but her thoughts racing. She turned to Mrs. Hargreaves, who was speaking in low tones with the inspector. "Might I ask, Mrs. Hargreaves," she said gently, "who handled the arrangements for the tea break?" Mrs. Hargreaves blinked, surprised by the question. "Why, I did, Miss Marple. I thought it would be a pleasant pause for the guests. I arranged for tea to be served in the garden, and I locked the drawing room myself to ensure the items were safe." "And you're certain the door was locked?" Miss Marple pressed, her tone mild but probing. "As certain as I can be," Mrs. Hargreaves replied, though her hands twisted the handkerchief again. "I turned the key myself. Thomas was there to guard it." Miss Marple nodded, her eyes drifting to the footman, who was now assisting with the constable's search. She made a mental note to speak with him later, perhaps when he was less on edge. For now, she returned to her seat, her mind turning over the sequence of events. The tea break had lasted no more than 20 minutes, she estimated, based on the time it had taken her to sip her tea and exchange pleasantries with Mrs. Bantry. 20 minutes was ample time for a practised hand, but the locked door and the footman's presence complicated matters. Unless, of course, the door had not been as secure as Mrs. Hargreaves believed, or the footman less vigilant. As the inspector concluded his initial inquiries, Miss Marple observed the 4 suspects once more. Mr. Trent's irritation had given way to a brooding silence, his eyes fixed on the window as if plotting his next move. Mr. Wren, still clutching his clipboard, was murmuring to himself, his fingers adjusting his spectacles with mechanical precision. Miss Beaumont, seated with an air of detached calm, was smoothing her dress, though Miss Marple noted a slight tremor in her hands. Mrs. Hargreaves, meanwhile, seemed on the verge of collapse, her strength sapped by the loss of her lifeline. The inspector approached Miss Marple, his expression a mix of respect and mild exasperation. "Well, Miss Marple," he said quietly, "I suppose you've already got a theory or two. Care to share?" Miss Marple smiled faintly, her eyes twinkling with a hint of mischief. "Oh, Inspector, it's far too early for theories, but I will say this. People are rarely as careful as they think, and small things, a word, a glance, a petal, can tell us more than they intend." Craddock raised an eyebrow, but made no further comment, accustomed as he was to her cryptic ways. As he turned to confer with his constable, Miss Marple settled back in her chair, her mind weaving a delicate web of possibilities. The vase, she suspected, had not vanished by magic, but by human hands, driven by motives as old as greed or desperation. The question was, whose hands and why? She thought of a similar incident in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a silver teapot had disappeared during a church fete, only to be found hidden in a flower pot. The culprit then had been a trusted figure, overlooked by all but her. This time, she resolved, she would watch closely, and the truth would reveal itself in its own time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across Willow Grange, Miss Marple rose to take her leave, her step light but purposeful. The game was afoot, and she was ready to play her part. Chapter 3. The Cellar's Burden. The morning mist clung to the hedgerows of St. Mary Mead, as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Willow Grange, her sensible shoes tapping a steady rhythm on the gravel path. The air was cool, with a hint of autumn's approach, and the village was stirring with the quiet gossip that followed the theft of the Ming vase. Miss Marple, her black lace shawl draped neatly over her shoulders, carried a small basket of scones, a pretext for her visit to Mrs. Evelyn Hargreaves, though her true purpose was to unravel the threads of the widow's story. In the Agatha Christie style, she knew that truth often lay hidden in the mundane, revealed through a chance word or an unguarded glance. Willow Grange loomed ahead, its ivy-clad walls sombre under the overcast sky. The grandeur of the manor seemed diminished, as if the theft had stolen not just the vase, but the spirit of the place. Miss Marple was admitted by a subdued housemaid, who led her to the morning room where Mrs. Hargreaves sat, her black silk dress unchanged from the day before, her face etched with fatigue. The room was a study in faded opulence. Damask curtains hung heavy with dust, and a chipped tea service sat on a sideboard, a relic of better days. Mrs. Hargreaves rose to greet her guest, her smile brittle but polite. "Miss Marple, how kind of you to call," she said, her voice strained as she gestured to a chair. "I'm afraid I'm poor company today. This dreadful business with the vase has quite undone me." Miss Marple settled into the chair, her eyes soft but observant, taking in the widow's trembling hands and the faint redness around her eyes. "My dear Mrs. Hargreaves," she said gently, setting the basket of scones on the table, "I thought a small gesture might lift your spirits, but I confess I'm also curious about yesterday's events. Such a shock for you, with so much at stake." Mrs. Hargreaves's lips quivered, and she sank back into her seat, her hands twisting the lace handkerchief in her lap. "It's more than a shock, Miss Marple. That vase was my salvation. The Colonel left me with debts I never knew the extent of until he was gone. The sale was to clear them, to keep Willow Grange, without the vase." Her voice broke, and she looked away, toward the window, where the mist pressed against the panes. Miss Marple nodded sympathetically, her mind noting the widow's distress, but also the absence of any mention of insurance. In her experience, people in such straits often clung to the hope of a policy, yet Mrs. Hargreaves had not. "It must be a heavy burden," she said, her tone inviting confidence. "And then to have Miss Beaumont arrive so unexpectedly. Quite a complication, I imagine." At the mention of Miss Beaumont, Mrs. Hargreaves stiffened, her fingers tightening on the handkerchief. "Oh, her," she said with a faint edge to her voice. "She appeared out of nowhere, claiming to be a cousin of the Colonel's. A letter, she said, from some obscure branch of the family. I couldn't very well turn her away, not with so many people about, but I didn't know her at all. She was intrusive, always asking about the family, the estate, the sale." Miss Marple's eyes flickered with interest, though her expression remained one of gentle concern. "Intrusive, you say? In what way?" Mrs. Hargreaves hesitated, as if weighing her words. She kept talking about the Colonel's past, his travels, his collections. During the tea break she cornered me in the garden, asking about old family papers, as if she had a right to them. It was distracting, to say the least. I was so flustered, I barely noticed the time passing until we returned to the drawing-room and found the vase gone. Miss Marple's mind seized on this detail. A distraction, deliberately timed, could be the key to the theft. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a village fete had been disrupted by a staged argument, allowing a pickpocket to slip away unnoticed. "And during this conversation," she said carefully, "did you notice anyone else near the house? Mr. Trent, perhaps? Or Mr. Wren?" Mrs. Hargreaves frowned, her brow furrowing as she tried to recall. "I don't think so. Mr. Trent was with the other bidders, I believe, and Mr. Wren was speaking with the solicitor near the tea tables. But I wasn't paying close attention, I'm afraid. My mind was on Miss Beaumont and her endless questions." Miss Marple nodded, her fingers smoothing the edge of her shawl. "And the drawing-room door? You locked it yourself, you said?" Yes, Mrs. Hargreaves replied, though her voice wavered slightly. I turned the key and gave it to Thomas to hold until we returned. He was to stand guard, and he swore he did. But I suppose I might have been mistaken about the lock. It's an old door, and the mechanism can be tricky. This admission, small though it was, struck Miss Marple as significant. A faulty lock, or the suggestion of one, could shift the narrative of the theft. She made a mental note to examine the door herself if possible, and to speak with Thomas, whose nervous demeanour had not escaped her notice. "You've had a great deal to manage," she said kindly. "Tell me, did anyone else have access to the key, or perhaps to the room before the sale began?" Mrs. Hargreaves shook her head. "Only Mr. Wren, to set up the display. He arrived early to arrange the vase and other items, but he was under my supervision the whole time. I trust him completely. He's handled the Colonel's collection for years." Miss Marple's smile was placid, but her mind was alert. Trust, she knew, was often misplaced, especially where valuable objects were concerned. She thought of Mr. Wren's polished manner, his spectacles glinting as he spoke of the vase's provenance. There was something about his precision that felt almost too perfect, like a carefully rehearsed performance. "Mr. Wren seems very capable," she said lightly. "And Mr. Trenter, he must have been disappointed to lose the vase." "Oh, dreadfully," Mrs. Hargreaves said, her tone softening with pity. "He was so keen on it, bidding fiercely until that other gentleman outbid him. I thought he might storm out, but he stayed, though he was in a foul mood during the tea break. I saw him pacing near the terrace, muttering to himself." Miss Marple filed this away, her thoughts turning to Mr. Trent's restless energy. A man thwarted in his desires could act rashly, she knew, though stealing under such scrutiny seemed bold even for him. She sipped her tea, which had grown lukewarm, and steered the conversation to lighter matters, asking about the garden's roses to ease Mrs. Hargreaves's tension. But her eyes wandered to the room's details. The heavy curtains, the locked cabinet where smaller antiques were stored, the faint scent of lavender polish that lingered in the air. Everything was in order, yet something felt amiss, though she could not yet name it. As she rose to leave, promising to call again, Miss Marple paused at the door. "One last thing, Mrs. Hargreaves," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "Did Miss Beaumont seem particularly interested in the vase itself?" Mrs. Hargreaves frowned, considering. "Not more than anyone else, I suppose. She admired it, as everyone did, but she didn't linger over it. Her questions were more about the family, almost as if she were looking for something else entirely." Miss Marple thanked her and stepped into the misty morning, her mind buzzing with possibilities. Miss Beaumont's arrival, Mrs. Hargreaves's distraction, the questionable lock, and the footman's soil-smudged boots formed a tapestry of clues, each thread demanding careful examination. She thought of a similar incident in her youth, when a visiting niece had distracted a hostess, while her accomplice pilfered a silver tray. The trick, Miss Marple knew, was to look beyond the obvious, to see the pattern beneath the surface. As she walked back to her cottage, the village clock chiming noon, she resolved to visit Mr. Trent next. His ambition, like Mrs. Hargreaves's desperation, was a motive worth exploring. And somewhere, she felt certain, the vase was waiting to be found, its absence a challenge to her quiet but relentless curiosity. Chapter 4. The Buyer's Ambition. The village of St. Mary Mead was bathed in the soft glow of a late summer afternoon. as Miss Jane Marple made her way to the Red Lion Inn, where Mr. Lionel Trent had taken up residence for the duration of the Willow Grange estate sale. The inn, with its low beams and ivy-draped facade, was a hub of local chatter, and Miss Marple knew that a casual visit might yield more than just a conversation with the collector. Her step was light, her black handbag tucked under her arm, but her mind was as sharp as ever, sifting through the fragments of the previous day's events. The theft of the Ming vase, she felt, was no impulsive act, but a calculated one, and Mr. Trent's evident hunger for the prize made him a figure worth studying. The inn's parlour was a cosy affair, with chintz curtains and a fire crackling despite the warmth of the season. Mr. Trent sat at a corner table, a glass of whisky before him, his broad shoulders hunched as he pored over a catalogue of antiques. His face, handsome in a severe way, bore the lines of a man accustomed to getting his way, and his dark eyes flicked up as Miss Marple approached, her presence as unthreatening as a village spinster could be. "Mr. Trent," she said, her voice gentle but clear, "I hope I'm not disturbing you. I was passing by and thought to inquire how you're faring after yesterday's unfortunate event." Trent's expression softened, though a trace of irritation lingered. "Miss Marple, isn't it?" he said, rising briefly to offer her a seat. "You're kind to ask, but I'm in no mood for pleasantries. That vase was a masterpiece, and to have it stolen, well, it's a damned outrage." He gestured to the chair opposite, and Miss Marple settled into it, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her eyes taking in the slight tremor in his fingers as he reached for his glass. "I quite understand," she said, her tone sympathetic. "It must be a blow, especially for a collector of your reputation. I hear you have quite a collection, pieces from all over the world, they say." Her words were a gentle prod, designed to draw him out, and she watched as his chest puffed slightly with pride. "I've spent years building it," he said, his voice warming despite himself. "Persian carpets, Venetian glass, a Han Dynasty bronze, each piece chosen for its rarity. That Ming vase would have been the crown jewel. I was prepared to pay well over the estimate, but some fool outbid me at the last moment." His jaw tightened, and he took a sip of whisky, his eyes narrowing as if reliving the moment. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite interest, though her mind was cataloguing his every word. "It must have been frustrating," she said, "to come so close and lose it, only for it to vanish entirely. Were you in the garden the whole time during the tea break? I recall seeing you near the terrace, but my memory isn't what it was." Trent's fingers paused on the glass, and he met her gaze, his eyes sharp but guarded. "I was in the garden, yes," he said. "I stepped away briefly to look at some jade figurines in the hall. Couldn't resist a closer look, but I wasn't near the drawing room. Too many people about, and that footman was hovering by the door." His tone was firm, but Miss Marple noted the way his free hand tapped the table, a restless rhythm that spoke of unease. "The hall, you say?" she prompted, her voice mild. "Near those lovely curtains by the drawing-room. They do frame the space beautifully, don't they?" Trent blinked, as if caught off guard by the shift in topic. "I suppose so," he said. "I didn't pay much attention to the decor. I was focused on the figurines, fine pieces, but not in the same league as the vase." He leaned back, his posture relaxing slightly, but Miss Marple's keen eyes caught the fleeting glance he cast toward the window, as if checking for eavesdroppers. She thought of the drawing room's heavy curtains, one of which had hung askew during her later inspection, concealing an alcove that might have served as a temporary hiding place. Trent's proximity to the hall was a detail worth noting, though his claim of examining figurines could be verified or disproved by others who had been near the house. "It's curious," she said, almost to herself, "how such a valuable item could disappear with so many people about. You didn't happen to notice Miss Beaumont, did you? She was quite taken with the garden, I hear." Trent's lips curled slightly, a hint of disdain in his expression. "That woman? She was flitting about, charming everyone, but I didn't see her near the house. Too busy playing the long-lost cousin, I'd wager. She didn't strike me as the type to know a Ming from a milk jug." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple sensed a calculated edge, as if he were steering the conversation away from himself. She smiled faintly, her mind turning over his words. Trent's scorn for Miss Beaumont suggested no alliance between them, but his quick dismissal raised questions. Was he deflecting, or simply uninterested in the young woman's motives? She thought of a collector she had known in St. Mary Mead, a man whose obsession with rare books had led him to bend the law in small but telling ways. Trent's ambition, she suspected, might run deeper than he let on. "And Mr. Wren," she continued, her voice as light as ever. "He seemed so meticulous about the Vase's display. Did you speak with him at all during the break?" Trent's fingers resumed their tapping, and he took another sip of whiskey before answering. "Wren? Briefly. He was fussing over some paperwork near the tea tables, going on about provenance. Man's a bore, but he knows his trade. I didn't see him near the drawing room, if that's what you're getting at." His eyes met hers, and for a moment Miss Marple felt the weight of his scrutiny, as if he were trying to gauge her intentions. She merely nodded, her expression serene. "Oh, I'm only trying to piece things together," she said. "My old head gets muddled with so many details. But you must have a sharp eye, Mr. Trent, to collect such treasures. Did you notice anything unusual yesterday? Anyone lingering where they shouldn't?" Trent hesitated, his gaze drifting to the catalogue on the table. "Not really," he said at last. "It was a busy scene. People milling about, bidding, gossiping. I was focused on the sale, not on who was where. If I'd known the vase would vanish, I'd have kept a closer watch." His voice carried a note of regret, but Miss Marple wondered if it was for the vase's loss or his own missed opportunity. She rose, smoothing her shawl, and thanked him for his time. "You've been most helpful, Mr. Trent," she said. "I do hope the inspector finds the vase soon. It would be a shame for such a piece to be lost forever." As she stepped out into the inn's courtyard, the air cool against her face, Miss Marple's thoughts were racing. Trent's account placed him near the hall, close enough to the drawing room to have acted swiftly, yet his story was plausible. Too plausible, perhaps, like a tale polished for retelling. His ambition for the vase was clear, but was it enough to drive him to theft? She recalled a village auction years ago, where a bidder's frustration had led to a petty act of sabotage. Trent, she felt, was capable of more, but his actions would depend on opportunity and nerve. Her next step, she decided, would be to speak with the inn's staff. The barmaid, a cheerful girl named Lily, was a font of local gossip, and Miss Marple knew that servants often saw what others missed. She approached Lily who was polishing glasses behind the bar, and engaged her in light conversation about the village, gradually steering the topic to the sale. "Mr. Trent's been in a state, hasn't he?" Miss Marple said, her tone conspiratorial. "I suppose he was here last night, brooding over the vase." Lily grinned, eager to share. "Oh, hi, Miss Marple. He was in the parlour till late, drinking more than usual. Kept muttering about missed chances, and how he'd have paid anything for that vase. Said something about it belonging in his collection, not some stranger's. I felt a bit sorry for him, truth be told." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled. "Did he go out at all, after the sale? A man like that might need a walk to clear his head." Lily thought for a moment, wiping her hands on her apron. "Now you mention it. He did step out for a bit round dusk. Said he was going to the post office, but it was closed by then, wasn't it? He wasn't gone long, though. Back before I locked up." This was a new thread, and Miss Marple tucked it away. The post office, closed by dusk, was an odd destination for a man in Trent's state of mind. Had he gone elsewhere, perhaps to meet someone or to check on a hidden prize? She thanked Lily, leaving a small coin for her trouble, and made her way back to the village, her mind weaving a pattern from the day's findings. Trent's ambition, she thought, was a powerful motive, but his movements during the tea break remained vague. The hall, the figurines, the restless tapping of his fingers, all pointed to a man on edge, perhaps one who had acted on impulse or with careful planning. As she passed the church, its spire piercing the gathering clouds, Miss Marple felt a familiar thrill. The puzzle was growing clearer, and Mr. Trent, with his burning desire for the vase, was a piece that fit all too well, yet not perfectly, not yet. Chapter 5. The Appraiser's Precision. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the cobbled streets of St. Mary Mead. As Miss Jane Marple approached the modest office of Mr. Percival Wren, tucked above a bookshop in the village square. The sign above the door, faded but legible, read Wren and Company, Antiquities and Valuations, and its unassuming air belied the expertise within. Miss Marple, her black handbag clasped firmly, had chosen this moment to call, knowing that Mr. Wren's meticulous nature might reveal more in the quiet of his own domain than in the chaos of Willow Grange. Her mind, ever alert, was piecing together the puzzle of the stolen Ming vase, and Mr. Wren's role as the appraiser, his hands so close to the prize, made him a figure of particular interest. The office was reached by a narrow staircase, its walls lined with prints of ancient pottery and faded maps. Miss Marple climbed with care, her steps measured, and knocked lightly on the door. Mr. Wren himself opened it, his wiry frame filling the doorway, his gold-rimmed spectacles catching the light. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice precise but tinged with surprise. "An unexpected pleasure. Do come in." He gestured to a cluttered room filled with shelves of leather-bound books, stacks of yellow documents, and a small table bearing a teapot and mismatched cups. The air smelled of ink and old paper, with a faint undercurrent of furniture polish that pricked Miss Marple's curiosity. She settled into a chair, her eyes taking in the details. A magnifying glass on the desk, a ledger open to a page of neat figures, and a single porcelain shard displayed under glass, its glaze reminiscent of the stolen vase. "I hope I'm not intruding, Mr. Wren," she said, her tone as gentle as a summer breeze. "I was in the village and thought to ask about your work. It must be fascinating, handling such treasures as the Ming vase." Mr. Wren adjusted his spectacles, a gesture Miss Marple had come to recognize as a reflex under pressure. "Fascinating, yes," he said, sitting opposite her. "And a great responsibility. The Hargreaves vase was a rare piece, late Ming, flawless in its craftsmanship. I spent hours verifying its authenticity, you know. A single chip could halve its value." His voice carried the pride of expertise, but his fingers, resting on the desk, betrayed a slight tremor. Miss Marple nodded, her expression one of polite admiration. "Such precision must require a steady hand," she said. "I noticed how carefully you arranged the vase at Willow Grange. You were there early, I believe, setting up the display." "Indeed," Mr. Wren replied, his tone warming to the subject. "I arrived at dawn to ensure everything was perfect. Mrs. Hargreaves entrusted me with the key to the drawing room, and I placed the vase myself, on that velvet pedestal. It was secure when the sale began." His words were confident, but Miss Marple's keen eyes caught a fleeting glance toward the window, as if he half expected someone to be listening. "And during the tea break," she continued, her voice soft but probing, "you were in the garden, I understand, with the solicitor discussing provenance." Mr. Wren's spectacles slipped slightly, and he pushed them back with a quick motion. "Yes, exactly," he said. "Mr. Grayson, the solicitor, had questions about a set of porcelain figurines. We were near the tea tables, quite absorbed in our discussion. I had no reason to return to the drawing room." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple noted a faint sheen on his forehead, despite the coolness of the room. She leaned forward slightly, her hands folded in her lap. "It's curious, isn't it, how such a valuable item could vanish in so short a time?" "The door was locked," Mrs. Hargreaves said, "and the footman was guarding it. Yet someone slipped through. You didn't happen to notice anyone near the house during the break, did you?" Mr. Wren's fingers tightened on the edge of his desk, and he shook his head. "No, I was focused on my conversation. The garden was crowded, people coming and going. I did see Mr. Trent pacing near the terrace, but that's hardly unusual. He was in a temper after losing the bid. And that Miss Beaumont was wandering about, charming everyone, but I didn't see her near the house." His tone was dismissive, but Miss Marple sensed a careful choice of words, as if he were measuring each one. She smiled faintly, her mind recalling the smudge of polish she had noticed on Mr. Wren's cuff at Willow Grange. It was a small thing, easily explained by his handling of the antiques, but it lingered in her thoughts, like a stitch out of place in a familiar pattern. "You must have a wealth of contacts in the antiques trade," she said, steering the conversation lightly. "People who would pay handsomely for a piece like the Ming vase, I imagine." Mr. Wren's eyes narrowed slightly, though his smile remained. "Oh, a few," he said. "Collectors, dealers, the occasional private buyer. But I'm a professional, Miss Marple. My role is to appraise, not to broker." His words were smooth, but there was a stiffness in his posture, as if he were guarding a secret. Miss Marple's gaze drifted to the porcelain shard on display, its blue glaze catching the light. "What a lovely piece," she said, almost to herself. "Is it from your own collection, or something you're studying?" Mr. Wren followed her gaze, and for a moment his composure faltered. "A study piece," he said quickly. "A fragment from a Ming bowl, useful for comparison. I keep it for reference." He rose, as if to signal the end of the conversation, and offered to pour her tea. Miss Marple accepted, noting the slight clatter of the teapot as he lifted it. A sign, perhaps, of nerves beneath his polished exterior. As they sipped tea, she turned the conversation to village matters, asking about the bookshop below and the local history society. But her mind was elsewhere. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, years ago, when a jeweller's assistant had pilfered a gem by hiding it among his tools, his expertise making him the least suspected. Mr. Wren's knowledge of the vase, his early access to the drawing room, and his nervous tics suggested a man who knew more than he said. The Polish on his cuff, the shard on his desk, these were threads in a tapestry that was slowly taking shape. Before leaving, Miss Marple paused at the door, her eyes resting on a small stack of letters on the desk, one bearing a foreign postmark. "You must correspond widely in your work," she said lightly. "It's a wonder you find time for it all." Mr. Wren's smile was tight. "It's part of the job," he said, ushering her out with a touch more haste than courtesy demanded. As she descended the staircase, Miss Marple's mind was alight with possibilities. The foreign letter, the polish, the shard, each was a clue, small but telling. Mr. Wren's precision, she suspected, might extend to more than appraisals. Had he seen an opportunity in the vase, not just to value it, but to possess it? She thought of the alcove behind the drawing-room curtain, empty but recently disturbed, and wondered if Mr. Wren's careful hands had played a part. As she stepped into the village square, the church bells chiming 4 o'clock, Miss Marple resolved to learn more about Mr. Wren's contacts. A discreet word with the postmistress, who knew every letter that passed through St. Mary Mead, might reveal something about that foreign postmark. For now, she tucked her handbag under her arm and walked toward home, her thoughts as intricate as the lace she so often knitted. The vase, she felt certain, was not far away, and Mr. Wren, with his spectacles and his secrets, was a piece of the puzzle she could not yet place, but would. Chapter 6. The Guest's Motive. The evening sky over St. Mary Mead was streaked with hues of amber and violet as Miss Jane Marple made her way to Rose Cottage, a modest dwelling on the village's outskirts, where Miss Clara Beaumont had taken lodgings. The cottage, with its thatched roof and overgrown garden, seemed an unlikely choice for a woman of Miss Beaumont's polished charm, and Miss Marple's curiosity was piqued by the contrast. Her black handbag swung lightly at her side, but her mind was as sharp as ever, weaving together the threads of the Ming vase's theft. Miss Beaumont's sudden appearance at Willow Grange, her claim of kinship, and her distracting presence during the tea break made her a figure of intrigue. And Miss Marple intended to unravel her story with the gentle precision of an Agatha Christie sleuth. The path to Rose Cottage wound through a copse of hazel trees, their leaves rustling in the evening breeze. Miss Marple, her shawl drawn close against the cooling air, noted the quiet of the place, a stark contrast to the bustle of the estate sale. She knocked on the cottage door, which was opened by a landlady, Mrs. Price, a stout woman with a wary eye. "Miss Beaumont's in the parlour," Mrs. Price said, her tone suggesting she was not entirely charmed by her tenant. "I'll fetch her, but she's a flighty one, if you ask me." Miss Marple smiled, her expression disarming. "I'm sure she's delightful," she said, stepping into the small hallway, where a faded rug and a chipped vase of wildflowers spoke of frugality. The parlour, when she was shown in, was sparsely furnished but tidy, with a single armchair by the fire, and a small table bearing a tea tray. Miss Beaumont appeared moments later. Her auburn hair swept into a neat chignon, her green dress replaced by a simpler frock that did little to dim her elegance. The sapphire brooch, Miss Marple noted, was still pinned to her collar, its gleam a touch too grand for the setting. "Miss Marple?" Miss Beaumont said, her smile bright but practised. "What a pleasant surprise! I hope you've not walked too far in this chill. Would you like tea?" She gestured to the tray, her movements graceful but deliberate, as if every action were calculated to please. "Thank you, my dear," Miss Marple said, settling into the armchair. "I was passing by and thought to call. The village is all abuzz about the vase, and I confess I'm curious about your visit to Willow Grange. It must have been quite an adventure, arriving so unexpectedly." Miss Beaumont's smile faltered for a fraction of a second, but she recovered quickly, pouring tea with a steady hand. "An adventure, yes," she said, her voice light. "I hadn't planned to attend the sale, but I was visiting the area and heard about it. Being a cousin of the Colonel's, I couldn't resist seeing the old place. Family history, you know. It's a weakness of mine." Miss Marple sipped her tea, her eyes gentle but piercing. "Family history is so fascinating," she said. "You mentioned a letter of introduction, I believe. It must be a comfort to have such ties to the Hargreaves family." Miss Beaumont's fingers paused on the teapot, and she set it down with care. "Oh, the letter," she said, her tone airy. "Just a note from an aunt who knew the Colonel years ago. It's a distant connection, really. More sentiment than substance. I showed it to Mrs. Hargreaves to explain my presence, but I'm afraid I startled her. She's under such strain, poor woman." Miss Marple nodded, her mind noting the vagueness of the explanation. A letter from an aunt, she thought, could be genuine or conveniently fabricated. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a young woman claiming kinship had turned out to be a fortune hunter, her credentials as flimsy as tissue paper. "You must have been disappointed to find the sale so disrupted," she said. "The vase was such a treasure. Did you admire it closely?" Miss Beaumont's eyes flickered, and she leaned back, her hands folding in her lap. "It was beautiful, of course," she said. "I looked at it, as everyone did, but I'm no expert. I was more interested in the house itself, the history, the stories it holds. I spent most of the tea break in the garden, lost in the roses. They're quite splendid, aren't they?" "Quite," Miss Marple agreed, her gaze drifting to Miss Beaumont's shoes, which were spotless, bearing no trace of the garden's damp earth. The rose petal she had found beneath the drawing-room pedestal came to mind, its presence a nagging detail. "You were in the garden the whole time, then? I thought I saw you near the terrace at one point, speaking with Mrs. Hargreaves." Miss Beaumont's smile tightened, and she adjusted her brooch, a gesture that seemed more nervous than casual. "Oh, I did speak with her briefly," she admitted. "She was kind enough to indulge my questions about the family. I'm afraid I kept her rather long. She seemed distracted, and I felt guilty for it afterward, especially when we learned about the vase." Miss Marple's eyes twinkled with quiet amusement. "No need for guilt, my dear," she said. "You couldn't have known. Though it's odd, isn't it, how the vase vanished in such a short time? The door was locked, and the footman was there. You didn't notice anyone near the drawing-room, did you?" Miss Beaumont shook her head, her auburn curls catching the firelight. "Not at all," she said. "I was too caught up in the roses and my chat with Mrs. Hargreaves." The house was so busy, with people coming and going. It's hard to keep track of everyone." Her voice was smooth, but Miss Marple detected a practiced quality, as if the words had been rehearsed. She shifted the conversation to lighter matters, asking about Miss Beaumont's plans in St. Mary Mead, and learned that the young woman intended to stay only a few days, to explore the area before returning to London. The mention of London piqued Miss Marple's interest, for she recalled a snippet of gossip from the postmistress about a telegram Miss Beaumont had sent the previous evening, addressed to a London antiques dealer. It was a small clue, but Miss Marple's mind, trained by years of observation, saw potential in it. Was Miss Beaumont's interest in Willow Grange purely familial, or did it mask a deeper purpose? As they finished their tea, Miss Marple's gaze fell on a small photograph on the mantelpiece, half hidden behind a vase of dried lavender. It showed a young woman, Miss Beaumont, she presumed, standing beside an older man in what appeared to be an auction house, surrounded by porcelain and silver. "What a charming picture," Miss Marple said, rising to examine it. "Is that you, my dear, with a relative?" Miss Beaumont's cheeks flushed faintly, and she stood quickly, moving to the mantel. "Oh, that's just an old friend," she said, her voice a touch too bright. "From a sale I attended years ago. I'm fond of auctions, though I'm no collector." She tucked the photograph behind the vase, as if to dismiss it. But Miss Marple's sharp eyes had caught the man's face, a face she vaguely recognized from a London auction catalogue, known for dealing in rare ceramics. Miss Marple smiled, her expression serene. "You must have seen many fine pieces," she said. "Perhaps you've come across Mr. Wren's work before. He seems so knowledgeable about porcelain." Miss Beaumont's fingers brushed the brooch again, and she shook her head. "I don't know him, I'm afraid," she said. "He was very professional at the sale, but we didn't speak. I'm just a visitor here, Miss Marple, not part of that world." Her smile was charming, but Miss Marple sensed a wall behind it, a carefully constructed barrier. As she took her leave, thanking Miss Beaumont for the tea, Miss Marple paused at the door. "One last thing," she said, her voice soft but deliberate. "That brooch of yours is quite striking. A family piece, perhaps?" Miss Beaumont's hand flew to the sapphire, and her smile wavered. "A gift," she said quickly, "from an admirer. It's not as grand as it looks." She laughed, but the sound was brittle, and Miss Marple's mind filed away the hesitation. Stepping into the twilight, Miss Marple walked slowly back to the village, her thoughts a tapestry of clues. Miss Beaumont's charm, her vague answers, the photograph, the telegram and the brooch, all suggested a woman playing a part. Was she a fortune hunter, as Mrs. Hargreaves suspected, or something more? The rose petal, the distraction during the tea break, and the London connection pointed to a purpose beyond mere curiosity. Miss Marple thought of a young woman in St. Mary Mead years ago, whose flirtations had masked a scheme to steal a neighbour's jewels. Miss Beaumont, she felt, was cut from similar cloth, though her game was more sophisticated. As the village lights twinkled in the distance, Miss Marple resolved to visit the postmistress next, to inquire about that telegram. The vase, she was certain, was tied to one of these threads. Mrs. Hargreaves's desperation, Mr. Trent's ambition, Mr. Wren's precision, or Miss Beaumont's charm. The truth, as always, lay in the details, and Miss Marple was determined to find it. Chapter 7. A Pattern Emerges. The soft glow of lamplight bathed Miss Jane Marple's cottage as she sat by the fire, her knitting needles clicking rhythmically in the quiet of the evening. The familiar ritual soothed her, allowing her mind to weave through the tangle of clues surrounding the theft of the Ming vase at Willow Grange. Outside, St. Mary Mead was hushed, the village settling into the stillness of night. But within Miss Marple's parlour, a pattern was beginning to take shape, a delicate web of motives, opportunities, and small telling details. In true Agatha Christie fashion, she knew that the truth often lay not in grand gestures, but in the overlooked, the seemingly trivial, and her conversations with Mrs. Hargreaves, Mr. Trent, Mr. Wren, and Miss Beaumont had provided threads aplenty. Her knitting, a half-finished scarf of soft grey wool, lay in her lap as she reviewed the facts. The vase had vanished during the 20-minute tea break, when the drawing-room was supposedly locked and guarded by the footman, Thomas. Mrs. Hargreaves's distraction by Miss Beaumont, Mr. Trent's proximity to the hall, Mr. Wren's early access to the room, and Miss Beaumont's vague account of her garden wanderings all pointed to opportunity. Yet motive remained elusive, and Miss Marple's experience told her that motive was the key to unlocking the puzzle. She thought of a similar theft in St. Mary Mead years ago, when a silver candlestick had disappeared during a charity bazaar, only to be found hidden in a vicar's cassock, stolen not for greed, but for spite. This case, she felt, was driven by something more calculated. She set her knitting aside and reached for a small notebook, where she jotted down her observations in a neat spidery hand. First, Mrs. Hargreaves, desperate to clear her debts, yet unlikely to steal her own lifeline, though her uncertainty about the lock suggested carelessness. Mr. Trent's ambition burned bright, his brief absence during the tea break and his odd dusk errand to the closed post office raising questions. Mr. Wren's precision, coupled with the Polish on his cuff and the foreign letter on his desk, hinted at connections beyond St. Mary Mead. Miss Beaumont's charm, her sapphire brooch, and the telegram to a London antiques dealer suggested a hidden agenda. And then there was Thomas the footman, with his soil-smudged boots and nervous demeanour, a minor player perhaps, but not to be dismissed. Miss Marple's eyes rested on the fire, its flames dancing like the thoughts in her mind. The rose petal she had found beneath the pedestal troubled her. It was a small thing, easily explained by a guest's wanderings, yet its presence in the locked room suggested someone had carried it inside. Miss Beaumont's claim of admiring the roses made her the obvious candidate, but her spotless shoes argued against it. Could the petal have come from another source? Perhaps a boutonniere, or a deliberate plant to mislead? She recalled a case in her youth, where a dropped handkerchief had led to a thief's undoing, its monogram betraying a connection no one had suspected. Her thoughts turned to the drawing-room itself. The alcove behind the curtain, empty but disturbed, was a clue in itself. It was too small for the vase to remain hidden there, but it could have served as a temporary refuge during the tea break, before the thief spirited the prize away. Mr. Wren's presence near the curtains, adjusting them to let in light, was a detail that lingered in her mind. His expertise, his access, and his nervous tics pointed to a man with something to hide. Yet Mr. Trent's restless energy and Miss Beaumont's calculated charm were equally compelling. Mrs. Hargreaves, though seemingly innocent, might have overlooked something in her distress. A key, a glance, a moment of inattention. Miss Marple rose, her movements slow but purposeful, and crossed to the window, where the village lay dark under a starlit sky. She thought of the vase, its delicate porcelain a symbol of wealth and beauty, and wondered where it lay now. Hidden in a suitcase, perhaps, or passed to a confederate. The timing of the theft suggested a plan executed with precision, yet the locked door and the footman's watch posed a challenge. She considered the possibility of an inside accomplice, Thomas perhaps, or even Mrs. Hargreaves herself, though the latter seemed unlikely. The widow's desperation was genuine, but desperation, Miss Marple knew, could cloud judgment. Her mind drifted to the broader context of the sale. The crowd of bidders, the flurry of activity, the chaos of the tea break, all provided cover for a thief. Yet the vase's size and fragility made it a difficult object to conceal. It could not have been slipped into a pocket or a bag without notice, unless the thief had prepared a hiding place in advance. The alcove, she felt certain, was part of the scheme, but where had the vase gone from there? She thought of Mr. Wren's office, with its stacks of papers and that curious porcelain shard, so like the vase in its glaze. Had he already begun to study it, or was it a decoy to divert suspicion? Miss Beaumont's telegram to a London dealer was another thread. The antiques trade, Miss Marple knew, was a world of shadows, where rare pieces changed hands in secret deals. The photograph on her mantel, showing her with a man in an auction house, suggested familiarity with that world, despite her claims of being a mere visitor. And Mr. Trent's dusk errand, so vaguely explained, hinted at a rendezvous or a delivery. Each suspect, she realized, had a piece of the puzzle, but the pattern was not yet complete. She returned to her chair, picking up her knitting as her thoughts turned to the footman, Thomas. His soil-smudged boots suggested he had strayed from his post, perhaps to the garden, but why? A moment of inattention, or a deliberate act? She made a note to speak with him, perhaps through the housemaid at Willow Grange, who might coax a confession from a nervous young man. Servants, Miss Marple had found, often saw what their masters missed, their loyalty tempered by the gossip that flowed like tea in a village kitchen. As the fire crackled, Miss Marple's mind circled back to the alcove. Its discovery had been a stroke of luck, but it raised more questions than it answered. If the vase had been hidden there, how had it been removed without Thomas noticing? The locked door, the footman's watch, the short window of time, all pointed to a thief who knew the house well. Mr. Wren, with his early access, was the obvious candidate, but Miss Beaumont's distraction of Mrs. Hargreaves suggested a possible partnership. Mr. Trent, though, could have acted alone, his ambition driving him to a bold move. She thought of a similar incident in St. Mary Mead, when a stolen brooch had been found in a garden shed, hidden in a flower pot. The thief, a trusted parishioner, had relied on the chaos of a church fete to cover her tracks. This theft, Miss Marple felt, was more sophisticated, but the principle was the same. Distraction, opportunity, and a hiding place close at hand. She resolved to revisit Willow Grange, to examine the drawing-room again, perhaps with Inspector Craddock's permission. The alcove, the petal, the polish on Mr. Wren's cuff, these were the stitches that would form the pattern, if she could only align them. As the village clock struck 10, Miss Marple set her knitting aside and rose to make a cup of cocoa. The night was young, and her mind was far from rest. The vase, she was certain, was still within reach, perhaps not in St. Mary Mead, but not far beyond. Tomorrow she would visit the postmistress to inquire about Miss Beaumont's telegram and seek out the housemaid to learn more about Thomas. Each step, she knew, would bring her closer to the truth, for human nature, as she had observed time and again, was as predictable as it was complex. With a small smile, she sipped her cocoa, her eyes bright with the thrill of the chase. Chapter 8. The Hidden Clue. The morning sun broke through the lingering mist over St. Mary Mead, casting a pale light on the cobbled streets, as Miss Jane Marple made her way back to Willow Grange. Her black handbag was tucked under her arm, and her step was brisk despite the early hour, for her mind was alight with the puzzle of the stolen Ming vase. The previous evening's reflections by her fireside had sharpened her focus, and she was determined to re-examine the drawing-room where the theft had occurred. In the Agatha Christie tradition, she knew that the smallest detail, a misplaced thread, a faint mark, could unravel the most cunning scheme, and the alcove behind the curtain, coupled with the rose petal she had found, beckoned her like a beacon. Inspector Craddock, ever diligent if occasionally sceptical of her methods, had agreed to her request to inspect the scene, provided she did not disturb his ongoing inquiries. He met her at the gates of Willow Grange, his notebook in hand, and his expression a mix of respect and mild exasperation. "Miss Marple," he said, tipping his hat, "I trust you'll find something we've missed, though my men have combed the place thoroughly. No sign of the vase, I'm afraid." Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling with quiet confidence. "You're very thorough, Inspector," she said, "but sometimes a fresh pair of eyes sees what familiarity overlooks. I shan't touch a thing, I promise." With that, she followed him into the manor, her sensible shoes silent on the polished floors. The drawing-room was much as it had been during the sale, though the air was heavier now, tinged with the staleness of a house in mourning. The velvet-draped pedestal stood empty, a mute testament to the theft, and the heavy oak panels seemed to absorb the light, casting the room in a sombre glow. Miss Marple's gaze swept the space, noting the orderly arrangement of remaining antiques. Silver candlesticks, a lacquered box, a set of jade figurines Mr. Trent had admired. Everything was in place, yet the absence of the vase created a void that seemed to draw all eyes. She approached the pedestal, her movements deliberate, and examined it closely. The burgundy velvet cloth was pristine, its folds undisturbed, but she recalled the faint ring of dust she had noticed before, smaller than the vase's base. Bending slightly, she peered beneath the cloth, her fingers hovering but not touching. There, in the shadow of the pedestal's edge, was a tiny scratch on the wood, barely visible, a fresh mark, as if something had been dragged across it. She straightened, her mind turning over the possibility that the vase had been moved briefly, perhaps to the alcove, before being spirited away. Her eyes drifted to the heavy curtains framing the tall windows, one of which had hung askew during her last visit. She moved toward it, her hand brushing the fabric lightly, as she recalled the maid's mention of Mr. Wren adjusting it to let in light. With a gentle tug, she parted the curtain, revealing the alcove, a narrow recess in the wall, just deep enough to hold a small object. It was empty, as she had expected, but the dust on the ledge bore faint traces of disturbance, a smudge, as if something had been placed there and removed. She leaned closer, her nose catching a faint whiff of lavender polish, the same scent she had noted in Mr. Wren's office. "Inspector," she called softly, beckoning Craddock over. "Have you examined this alcove? It seems to have been used recently." Craddock frowned, joining her. "We looked, but it's too small for the vase, Miss Marple. Barely a foot deep. A hiding place, perhaps, but not for long." He ran a finger along the ledge, his brow furrowing at the smudge. "Could be nothing. Dust settles oddly in these old houses." "Perhaps," Miss Marple said, her tone mild but her mind racing. "But dust doesn't settle on its own, does it? Someone moved something here and not long ago." She stepped back, her eyes scanning the room for other signs. The floor, polished to a mirror shine, showed no scuffs, but near the alcove she noticed a faint indentation in the carpet, as if a heavy object had rested there briefly. It was too vague to be conclusive, but it added to her growing conviction that the alcove had played a role in the theft. She turned her attention to the door, its heavy oak frame and ornate lock a formidable barrier, or so it seemed. Mrs. Hargreaves had insisted she locked it, but her uncertainty about the mechanism lingered in Miss Marple's mind. She examined the keyhole, noting a faint scratch around it as if a tool had been used to test or tamper with it. "Inspector," she said, "has anyone checked the lock itself?" Mrs. Hargreaves mentioned it could be tricky. Craddock nodded, signalling to his constable, who produced a key from an evidence bag. "We tried it," he said. "It works, though it's stiff. Old locks are like that. Takes a bit of force. No signs of it being picked, though." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly. A stiff lock could be a convenient excuse, or a genuine flaw exploited by a clever thief. She thought of Thomas the footman and his soil-smudged boots. Had he been bribed, or merely negligent? She resolved to speak with him, but first she turned to the maid Ellen, who was hovering near the doorway, her apron clutched nervously. "Ellen, my dear," Miss Marple said, her voice gentle, "you were about during the tea break, weren't you? Did you see anyone near the drawing-room, perhaps adjusting the curtains or lingering by the door?" Ellen, a young woman with wide eyes and a tendency to blush, hesitated. "I was in the kitchen mostly, ma'am," she said, "helping with the tea things. But I did see Mr. Wren by the curtains like I told you before. He said he was letting in light, but it seemed odd. The windows were already open. And I saw Miss Beaumont coming in from the garden, her dress a bit damp from the grass, though she said she'd been by the roses." Miss Marple's eyes brightened at this. "Damp, you say? How interesting! And Mr. Trenter, or Mrs. Hargreaves?" "Mr. Trent was in the hall, looking at those figurines," Ellen said, her voice gaining confidence. "He was there a good while, muttering to himself. Mrs. Hargreaves was in the garden, talking with that Miss Beaumont, until we called everyone back." She paused, then added, "Oh, and Thomas was by the door, like he was told. But I saw him step out to the terrace for a moment, to speak with one of the gardeners. He wasn't gone long, mind." This was a new thread, and Miss Marple tucked it away. Thomas's brief absence could have provided a window for the thief, though it raised the question of how they entered the locked room. She thanked Ellen, slipping her a small coin for her trouble, and turned back to the alcove, her mind piecing together the sequence. The vase, she suspected, had been moved to the alcove during the tea break, hidden behind the curtain while Thomas was distracted. But where had it gone from there? The smudge of polish, the scratched lock, the indentation in the carpet, all pointed to a plan executed with care, but not without traces. She stepped outside with Craddock, who was jotting notes with a furrowed brow. "You've got that look, Miss Marple," he said, half smiling. "What's brewing in that head of yours?" "Oh, nothing definite, Inspector," she said, her tone light but her eyes sharp. "But I do think the alcove is important. It's not the final hiding place, but a stepping stone. And that polish, lavender, I believe, might lead us somewhere." She did not mention Mr. Wren directly, but her thoughts circled back to his office, the shard of porcelain, and the foreign letter. The scent of polish linked him to the scene, though it was not yet proof. As she left Willow Grange, the sun climbing higher, Miss Marple resolved to visit the postmistress next. The telegram Miss Beaumont had sent, and the letter on Mr. Wren's desk, might hold the key to their motives. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen locket had been traced through a postmark, revealing a lover's betrayal. The vase, she felt, was close, perhaps hidden in a nearby barn, or smuggled to a dealer's hands. With each clue, the pattern grew clearer, and Miss Marple's quiet determination burned brighter. The thief, she knew, had left a trail, and she was on its scent. Chapter 9. The Appraiser's Secret. The late morning air in St. Mary Mead carried a crisp edge as Miss Jane Marple approached the village post office, a quaint building with a red-tiled roof and a window adorned with geraniums. Her visit to Willow Grange had sharpened her focus on the alcove and the faint scent of lavender polish, a clue that pointed unmistakably to Mr. Percival Wren. Yet the web of the Ming vase's theft was intricate, and Miss Marple's keen mind, honed by years of observing human nature in the Agatha Christie tradition, sought to untangle it through the small but telling details others overlooked. The foreign letter she had glimpsed on Mr. Wren's desk, coupled with his nervous tics and the polish on his cuff, suggested a man whose expertise might extend beyond appraisals into darker waters. A discreet inquiry at the post office, she hoped, would shed light on his connections. The postmistress, Mrs. Muggleton, was a wiry woman with a sharp memory for every letter and telegram that passed through her hands. She greeted Miss Marple with a nod, her spectacles perched on her nose as she sorted a stack of envelopes. "Morning, Miss Marple," she said, her tone brisk but friendly. "Heard about the goings-on at Willow Grange. Terrible business, that Vase. Come to send a letter, or is it something else?" Miss Marple smiled, her eyes twinkling with the gentle charm that disarmed even the most guarded. "Just a small matter, Mrs. Muggleton," she said, setting her handbag on the counter. "I was wondering about telegrams sent recently, say in the last day or two. I hear Miss Beaumont sent one to London, and I'm curious if others have been as busy with their correspondence." Mrs. Muggleton's eyebrows rose, and she leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "Well, now you're not wrong about Miss Beaumont. She sent a telegram the evening of the sale, to a Mr. Carver in London, Bond Street no less. Something about arrangements confirmed and awaiting delivery. I thought it odd, her being a stranger and all." She paused, then added, "And Mr. Wren, he's been getting letters from abroad, France, I think. One came yesterday, thick and official-looking, from a place in Paris. He was in a right state when he collected it, adjusting those spectacles of his like he does when he's nervy." Miss Marple's lips pursed slightly, though her expression remained serene. "Paris, you say? How interesting. And was there anything else about Mr. Wren's post? He must be quite busy with his work. Oh, aye, Mrs. Muggleton said, warming to the topic. He gets letters regular-like from dealers and such, but this one stood out. Fancy envelope, sealed with wax. He tucked it away quick like he didn't want me seeing. Mind you, he's always polite, but there's something about him lately, like he's got a secret he's holding tight. Thanking Mrs. Muggleton with a nod and a promise to send her some of her famous damson jam, Miss Marple stepped back into the sunlight, her mind buzzing. The telegram from Miss Beaumont to a Bond Street dealer suggested a connection to the antiques trade, but Mr. Wren's Paris letter was a new thread, one that hinted at a broader network. She recalled a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen painting had been traced through a foreign buyer's correspondence. The thief's confidence undone by a careless letter. Mr. Wren, she suspected, was not as meticulous as he seemed. Her next step was to revisit Mr. Wren, but this time with a purpose beyond polite inquiry. She made her way to his office above the bookshop, the narrow staircase creaking under her careful steps. The door was ajar, and she knocked lightly, her senses alert. Mr. Wren appeared, his spectacles slightly askew, a faint flush on his cheeks as if he had been caught unawares. "Miss Marple," he said, his voice tight but courteous, "twice in as many days. To what do I owe the pleasure?" "I was in the village," she said, her tone as mild as ever, "and thought to ask your advice on a small matter. My nephew has come across an old porcelain dish, and I wondered if you might know its origin. But I see you're busy. Those papers look important." Her eyes flicked to the desk, where the foreign letter was now conspicuously absent, though a faint wax residue marked the blotter. Mr. Wren adjusted his spectacles, his fingers betraying a slight tremor. "Just routine correspondence," he said, gesturing to a chair. "I'd be happy to help with your nephew's dish. Describe it, if you please." His manner was professional, but Miss Marple noted the way his eyes darted to the desk, as if ensuring nothing incriminating remained in view. She described a fictitious dish, her words vague but enthusiastic, all the while observing his reactions. As he responded with technical details about glazes and kiln marks, she steered the conversation to the Ming vase. "Such a pity about Mrs. Hargreaves's vase," she said. "You handled it so carefully, I recall. Have you heard any talk in the trade about where it might have gone? I imagine collectors would pay dearly for such a piece." Mr. Wren's hand froze mid-gesture, and his spectacles slipped again. "I've heard nothing," he said quickly. "The trade is full of rumours, but nothing solid. It's likely still in the county, hidden somewhere. A barn, perhaps, or a smuggler's cache." His voice was steady, but Miss Marple caught a flicker of unease in his eyes, as if he had said more than intended. "A smuggler's cache," she repeated, her tone thoughtful. "What a curious idea. You must know many such collectors, Mr. Wren, with your connections abroad. Paris, for instance, such a hub for antiques." She watched him closely, her eyes gentle but unyielding. Mr. Wren's flush deepened, and he rose, moving to a shelf as if to retrieve a book. "Paris, yes," he said, his back to her. "I have colleagues there, but nothing to do with this affair. My work is strictly above board, Miss Marple." His tone was defensive, and Miss Marple's mind seized on it, recalling the wax-sealed letter and Mrs. Muggleton's observation of his agitation. She rose, smoothing her shawl. "Of course," she said, "I wouldn't dream of suggesting otherwise." "You've been most kind, Mr. Overlook. I'll let you know about that dish." As she turned to leave, her gaze fell on a small wastebasket by the desk, where a torn envelope peeped out, its edge bearing a French postmark. She made no comment, but her heart quickened. The envelope, she suspected, was the one Mrs. Muggleton had described, discarded in haste. Outside, Miss Marple paused in the village square, her thoughts racing. The Paris letter, the lavender polish, the alcove smudge, all pointed to Mr. Wren as a man with secrets. Had he arranged to sell the vase to a foreign buyer, using the tea break to hide it in the alcove before passing it to a confederate? The idea fit his expertise and access, but Miss Beaumont's telegram and Mr. Trent's errand suggested others might be involved. She thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a stolen necklace had been smuggled abroad by a trusted shopkeeper, his respectability a perfect mask. Determined to confirm her suspicions, Miss Marple resolved to share her findings with Inspector Craddock, though not yet in full. She needed one more piece of the puzzle. She would ask the inspector to watch Mr. Wren's movements, perhaps tail him to any meetings in the neighbouring towns. The vase, she felt, was not far, perhaps already en route to a dealer's hands. As she walked home, the village clock chiming noon, her mind was a tapestry of clues, each stitch bringing her closer to the truth. Mr. Wren's secret, she was certain, was the key, and she would unravel it with the quiet tenacity that had solved so many mysteries before. Chapter 10. The trap is set. The soft light of dusk settled over St. Mary Mead, painting the village in hues of lavender and gold. As Miss Jane Marple sat in her cottage, her knitting needles idle for once, her mind a whirl of calculated plans. The theft of the Ming vase at Willow Grange had woven a complex tapestry of clues, and her recent discoveries, the lavender polish linking Mr. Wren to the alcove, the Paris letter, and Miss Beaumont's telegram to a London dealer, had brought the pattern into sharper focus. In true Agatha Christie fashion, Miss Marple knew that the truth often emerged when the guilty were pressed, their composure shaken by a well-placed nudge. To catch the thief, she decided, a trap was needed, and she would set it with the precision of a spider spinning its web. Her plan was simple yet daring. A rumour that the vase had been found, to be announced at a gathering at Willow Grange, where all suspects, Mrs. Hargreaves, Mr. Trent, Mr. Wren, and Miss Beaumont, would be present. The guilty party, she reasoned, would betray themselves through panic or action, unable to resist checking their hiding place or contacting a confederate. She telephoned Inspector Craddock, her voice as gentle as ever, and outlined her idea, careful to present it as a suggestion rather than a demand. "It's just a thought, Inspector," she said, "but people under pressure often reveal more than they intend. A little rumour might stir things up." Craddock, accustomed to her uncanny insights, agreed, though his tone carried a trace of scepticism. "It's a long shot, Miss Marple," he said, "but we've got little else to go on. I'll arrange the gathering for tomorrow evening and have my men keep a close watch on Wren, especially. That Polish business has me thinking." He promised to invite the suspects under the pretext of discussing new evidence, and Miss Marple hung up with a satisfied nod, her mind already anticipating the scene. The following evening, Willow Grange was aglow with lamplight, its drawing-room restored to a semblance of order for the occasion. Mrs. Hargreaves, pale but composed, greeted the guests with a strained smile, her black silk dress a reminder of her ongoing grief. Mr. Trent arrived, his hawkish features set in a scowl, impatience barely concealed as he took a seat near the fireplace. Mr. Wren, clutching his ever-present clipboard, adjusted his spectacles repeatedly, his eyes darting to the empty pedestal, as if expecting the vase to reappear. Miss Beaumont, her auburn hair gleaming under the chandelier, entered with her usual charm, her sapphire brooch catching the light as she settled on a brocade sofa. Miss Marple, unobtrusive in her corner, knitted quietly, her needles a steady rhythm as she observed each face. Inspector Craddock took the floor, his manner authoritative but measured. "Thank you for coming," he said, his notebook in hand. "We've had a development in the case of the missing vase. I'm not at liberty to share details, but I can say we've received information suggesting it's been located. Not far from here, in fact. We expect to recover it soon." His words were deliberately vague, designed to provoke, and Miss Marple watched the reactions with keen interest. Mrs. Hargreaves gasped, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Inspector, is it true? Where was it found?" Her voice trembled with hope, and Miss Marple noted the genuineness of her relief, a sign, she thought, of her innocence. Mr. Trent leaned forward, his eyes narrowing. "Located, you say? Where? I'd like to know who's had it all of this time." His tone was sharp, but his fingers, tapping restlessly on the arm of his chair, suggested agitation rather than guilt. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on him, recalling his dusk errand to the closed post office, but his reaction seemed more curious than panicked. Miss Beaumont's smile remained fixed, though her hands tightened in her lap, the sapphire brooch glinting as she shifted. "How wonderful," she said, her voice light. "I do hope it's returned to Mrs. Hargreaves soon." Her composure was flawless, but Miss Marple caught a fleeting glance towards Mr. Wren, as if seeking a cue. Mr. Wren, however, was the one to watch. His spectacles slipped down his nose, and he pushed them back with a jerky motion, his face paling noticeably. "Located," he echoed, his voice a touch higher than usual. "That's remarkable. Where was it found, Inspector?" His fingers gripped the clipboard so tightly that the paper creased, and Miss Marple's heart quickened. His reaction, she thought, was the most telling. A man caught off guard, his careful facade cracking. Craddock, sensing the tension, offered no further details. "We're following leads," he said. "I'll need you all to remain available for further questions. That's all for now." He dismissed the group, but Miss Marple's eyes followed Mr. Wren as he rose, his movements stiff, and excused himself to fetch a glass of water. She nodded to Craddock, who signalled a constable to keep watch. Later that evening, as the guests dispersed, Craddock's men reported a development. Mr. Wren had been seen slipping out of Willow Grange, heading not to his lodgings, but to his office in the village. Acting on Miss Marple's suggestion, Craddock had stationed a constable nearby, and within the hour they caught Mr. Wren attempting to retrieve a package from a hidden compartment beneath his office floorboards. The package, wrapped in soft cloth, was none other than the Ming vase, its cobalt dragons gleaming in the lantern light. Confronted in the drawing-room, with Miss Marple quietly present, Mr. Wren's composure collapsed. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he stammered, his spectacles fogging with perspiration. "A collector in Paris offered a fortune, more than the sale price. I hid it in the alcove during the tea break, planning to move it later. I couldn't resist." His voice broke, and he sank into a chair, the weight of his confession palpable. Miss Marple's needles clicked softly, her expression serene, but her mind satisfied. The trap had worked, and Mr. Wren's greed, as she had suspected, had been his undoing. She thought of a similar case in St. Mary Mead, where a trusted clerk had pilfered church funds, betrayed by his own panic when confronted. The vase, now safe, would be returned to Mrs. Hargreaves, and the pattern, at last, was complete. Chapter 11. The Confession. The lamplight in the drawing-room of Willow Grange cast a warm but sombre glow, its flickering shadows dancing across the oak-panelled walls as the aftermath of Mr. Percival Wren's capture unfolded. Miss Jane Marple sat in her accustomed corner, her knitting needles moving with a steady rhythm, her pale blue eyes observing the scene with the quiet intensity of an Agatha Christie sleuth. The Ming vase, recovered moments ago from Mr. Wren's office, stood once more on its velvet-draped pedestal, its cobalt dragons gleaming as if untouched by the drama that had surrounded it. Inspector Craddock, his notebook open, stood over Mr. Wren, who sat slumped in a chair, his spectacles askew, his meticulous facade shattered by the weight of his confession. The other suspects, Mrs. Evelyn Hargreaves, Mr. Lionel Trent, and Miss Clara Beaumont, had been summoned back to the drawing-room, their faces a study in varied emotions, relief, indignation, and guarded curiosity. Mrs. Hargreaves, her black silk dress slightly crumpled, clutched a handkerchief, her eyes brimming with tears as she gazed at the restored vase. Mr. Trent, his hawkish features set in a scowl, leaned against the fireplace, his arms crossed as if restraining his temper. Miss Beaumont, seated on the brocade sofa, maintained her polished charm, though her hands were clasped tightly, the sapphire brooch at her collar catching the light. Miss Marple's gaze flickered between them, noting every nuance, for while Mr. Wren's guilt was clear, the roles of the others in the tapestry of the theft remained to be fully unravelled. Craddock's voice cut through the tense silence. "Mr. Wren," he said, his tone firm but measured, "you've admitted to hiding the vase in your office, but I need the full story. How did you manage it, and why? Speak plainly now. There's no use holding back." Mr. Wren's shoulders sagged, and he removed his spectacles, rubbing his eyes as if to banish the reality of his situation. "It was the money," he said, his voice low and strained. "A collector in Paris, Duval his name is, contacted me months ago, seeking rare Ming pieces. He offered a sum far beyond what the vase would fetch at auction. I saw a chance to secure my future. The Hargreaves sale was the perfect opportunity." His fingers trembled as he replaced his spectacles, and Miss Marple noted the faint sheen of perspiration on his brow, a stark contrast to his usual precision. He continued, his words tumbling out as if a dam had broken. "I arrived early that morning to set up the display, as Mrs. Hargreaves trusted me to handle the vase. During the tea break, I saw my chance. Miss Beaumont was keeping Mrs. Hargreaves occupied in the garden. I didn't plan that, but it was a godsend." The footman, Thomas, stepped away for a moment to speak with a gardener. I slipped back into the drawing-room, claiming I needed to adjust the curtains for light. The door's lock was stiff, but I'd tested it earlier. It could be opened with a slight jiggle, even without the key. Miss Marple's needles paused, her mind seizing on this detail. The scratched lock, the faint indentation in the carpet near the alcove, it all fit. She recalled Mrs. Hargreaves's uncertainty about the lock's reliability, a small oversight that had opened a window for the thief. Mr. Wren's expertise, she thought, had made him the perfect candidate to exploit it. "I hid the vase in the alcove," Mr. Wren went on, his voice barely above a whisper. "It was only for a few minutes until the guests returned. I plan to retrieve it later that night, after the sale, and smuggle it to a contact in London who would arrange its transport to Paris. But when the theft was discovered, I panicked. I moved it to my office under the floorboards, thinking I could wait until the fuss died down." He looked up, his eyes meeting Craddock's with a mix of defiance and shame. "I didn't mean to cause such trouble. It was just the money." Mrs. Hargreaves let out a soft sob. Her handkerchief pressed to her lips. "How could you, Mr. Wren?" she said, her voice trembling. "You knew what that vase meant to me, to my family. I trusted you." Mr. Wren flinched, his face crumpling. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Hargreaves," he said. "I thought it would be a clean transaction. No one hurt, just a private sale. I didn't think it would come to this." Miss Marple's eyes flicked to Miss Beaumont, whose composure remained intact, though her fingers twitched slightly, betraying a flicker of unease. The young woman's distraction of Mrs. Hargreaves, though unplanned by Mr. Wren, had been pivotal. Was it truly a coincidence, or had Miss Beaumont played a subtler role? Miss Marple thought of her telegram to the London dealer, and the photograph with a man in an auction house. Her claim of familial curiosity seemed thinner now, but without evidence it remained a suspicion. Mr. Trent, meanwhile, snorted derisively. "A fine mess, Wren," he said, his voice sharp. "You nearly cost me a fortune, and Mrs. Hargreaves her livelihood, all for a quick profit." His indignation was palpable, but Miss Marple noted the absence of surprise in his tone, as if he had suspected foul play all along. His dusk errand to the closed post office still nagged at her, though it seemed less relevant now, perhaps a red herring born of his frustration. Craddock turned to Miss Marple, his expression a mix of admiration and exasperation. "You were right about the trap, Miss Marple," he said. "That rumour about the vase being found flushed him out. But I'm curious. How did you know it was Wren?" Miss Marple's needles resumed their rhythm, her smile gentle but knowing. "Oh, Inspector, it was the little things," she said. "The lavender polish on his cuff, matching the scent in the alcove, the Paris letter, which suggested a buyer beyond our shores. And his nervousness when I mentioned collectors. He was too quick to dismiss it. People, you see, often betray themselves in the smallest ways, like a stitch dropped in a pattern." She did not mention Miss Beaumont's telegram or Mr. Trent's errand, for those threads, while intriguing, had not led to the vase's recovery. Craddock nodded, jotting a final note. "Well, Mr. Wren, you'll be coming with us," he said, signalling his constable to escort the appraiser. As Wren was led away, his head bowed. The room seemed to exhale, the tension easing like a storm passing. Miss Marple's gaze lingered on Miss Beaumont, who rose gracefully, murmuring her relief to Mrs. Hargreaves. "I'm so glad it's resolved," she said, her voice smooth. "I must be off to London soon, but I do hope you'll recover fully, Mrs. Hargreaves." Her smile was flawless, but Miss Marple's sharp eyes caught the haste in her movements, as if she were eager to leave the scene. Mr. Trent, too, made his excuses, his scowl softening as he congratulated Craddock on the recovery. "I'll bid again when the sale resumes," he said, "but I'll be damned if I let another treasure slip away." His ambition, Miss Marple thought, was undimmed, though his role in the theft appeared to be only that of a thwarted bidder. As the room emptied, Miss Marple remained, her knitting a quiet presence in her lap. she thought of a case in St. Mary Mead, where a trusted gardener had stolen a silver tray, his guilt revealed by a careless footprint. Mr. Wren's downfall, like that gardener's, lay in his inability to resist temptation, his expertise no match for his greed. Yet Miss Beaumont's role nagged at her. A distraction so perfectly timed, a telegram so suggestive. Perhaps, she mused, there was another chapter to this story, one she would keep in mind should Miss Beaumont ever return to St. Mary Mead. With a small smile, she tucked her knitting into her bag and rose, ready to return to her cottage. The vase was safe, the thief caught, and the pattern for now complete. Chapter 12. The vase restored. The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Willow Grange, casting a gentle glow over the drawing-room, where the Ming vase once again held pride of place on its velvet-draped pedestal. The air was lighter now, the oppressive weight of the theft lifted by Mr. Percival Wren's confession and the vase's recovery. Miss Jane Marple, seated in her familiar corner, her knitting needles clicking softly, observed the scene with the quiet satisfaction of a puzzle solved. In true Agatha Christie fashion, she knew that the resolution of a mystery often brought clarity to the human heart, revealing not just guilt, but the frailties that drove it. The gathered company, Mrs. Evelyn Hargreaves, Mr. Lionel Trent, and Miss Clara Beaumont, reflected a mix of relief, resolution, and lingering unease, each processing the aftermath in their own way. Mrs. Hargreaves stood beside the vase, her black silk dress less severe today, softened by a lace shawl that hinted at a return to hope. Her eyes, red-rimmed from days of worry, now shone with tears of gratitude as she touched the porcelain gently, as if assuring herself it was real. "Miss Marple," she said, her voice trembling but warm, "I can't thank you enough. If not for your insight, I might have lost everything. The sale can go forward now, and Willow Grange will be safe." Her smile was fragile but genuine, and Miss Marple inclined her head, her expression one of quiet modesty. "It was the inspector's work, my dear," she said, her needles pausing. "I only noticed a few small things, as one does in a village like ours. People are so often careless with their secrets." Her eyes twinkled, but her mind lingered on the threads that had unravelled the case. The lavender polish, the Paris letter, the alcove smudge. Mr. Wren's greed had been the key, but the roles of the others had not gone unnoticed. Mr. Trent, standing near the fireplace, his arms no longer crossed in irritation, seemed almost genial, though his hawkish features retained their sharpness. "Well, Mrs. Hargreaves," he said, his voice carrying a grudging respect, "you've got your treasure back, and I'll be first in line when the bidding resumes. That vase belongs in a collection like mine, not some Parisian's vault." He glanced at Miss Marple, a flicker of curiosity in his eyes. "You've a sharp mind, Miss Marple. I'd have pegged Wren for a stickler, not a thief." Miss Marple smiled faintly, her needles resuming their rhythm. "People surprise us, Mr. Trent," she said. "Ambition can lead even the most careful astray. I'm sure you'll find many fine pieces for your collection." She noted his relaxed posture, a contrast to his earlier restlessness, and decided his dusk errand to the closed post office was likely a fit of pique, not a clue to guilt. His ambition, while fierce, had not crossed into crime. Miss Beaumont, seated on the brocade sofa, was a study in poised retreat. Her auburn hair gleamed under the chandelier, and her sapphire brooch caught the light, but her smile was less assured today, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "I'm so pleased for you, Mrs. Hargreaves," she said, her voice smooth but tinged with haste. "I must return to London soon, but I'll carry fond memories of St. Mary Mead." Her eyes met Miss Marple's briefly, and the older woman detected a flicker of wariness, as if Miss Beaumont sensed her charm had been seen through. Miss Marple's mind returned to the telegram to the London dealer, and the photograph on Miss Beaumont's mantel. The young woman's distraction of Mrs. Hargreaves, though not part of Mr. Rentpeschricker's plan, had been too convenient to dismiss entirely. "You've been most kind, Miss Beaumont," Miss Marple said, her tone gentle but probing. "I hope you found the family history you were seeking. The Hargreaves have such a rich past." Miss Beaumont's smile tightened, and she adjusted her brooch, a gesture Miss Marple had come to recognize as a tell. "Oh, it was more curiosity than anything," she said. "I'm afraid I got carried away with my questions. I'll leave the antiques to experts like Mr. Trent." Her laugh was light, but Miss Marple sensed a desire to close the subject. Later, in a quiet moment with Inspector Craddock, Miss Beaumont admitted she had hoped to uncover family papers that might entitle her to a share of the estate, but she denied any role in the theft. Her confession, while plausible, left Miss Marple with a lingering suspicion, though no evidence tied her directly to the vase. Inspector Craddock, standing by the pedestal, closed his notebook with a satisfied snap. "The case is closed," he said, addressing the room. "Mr. Wren will face charges, and the vase is back where it belongs. Thanks to Miss Marple's intuition, we got there faster than I expected." His tone held a wry respect, and Miss Marple inclined her head, her smile demure. As the gathering dispersed, Mrs. Hargreaves announced that the sale would resume the following week, with the vase as its centrepiece. Mr. Trent, true to his word, promised a substantial bid, while Miss Beaumont made her farewells, her departure to London imminent. Miss Marple, gathering her knitting, took one last look at the vase, its delicate beauty a reminder of the greed it had inspired. Stepping into the soft light of the village, her shawl drawn close, Miss Marple walked home, her thoughts drifting to a case in St. Mary Mead years ago, where a stolen locket had revealed a village matron's envy. The Ming vase, like that locket, had exposed human frailties, greed in Mr. Wren, ambition in Mr. Trent, opportunism in Miss Beaumont. Mrs. Hargreaves, alone, had emerged untainted, her desperation tempered by honesty. As the village clock chimed, Miss Marple settled by her fire, her knitting resumed, and her mind already open to the next mystery St. Mary Mead might offer. The world, she knew, was full of patterns, and she was ever ready to unravel them.